Hey, good evening, everybody.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hello. Hello. What you all been doing today?
Studying the Torah, Rabbi.
You've been studying Torah.
Yeah.
You've been getting ready for tonight. I appreciate
Oh
it.
yeah.
I'm sending Diane. I'm trying to send Diane Gilden the she can't find the email. She lost the invite. So hold on one second. I'm sending it out. Yeah. Gosh. I'm exhausted. Is this month over yet?
No, but it sure started out with a bang.
How's your electricity there, Sandy?
We got electricity back on somewhere around 5:30. So
That
it was
late.
off from, They had
Oh,
to
dang.
replace the entire pole. The pole was
Really?
coming down, it was broken in half.
That's what it looked like. Yeah.
And they stopped all of the traffic on Sand Canyon, so
I gotta show everybody what
Crazy.
happened to Sandy. Hold on a second. I gotta
Well,
show this. Picture.
thankfully it didn't happen to me, it happened to our property.
Well, it happened.
Thank God.
Thank goodness it didn't happen to you.
Right.
Well, it happened. Yes, correct. On your property. I'm gonna send it.
Kind
Hold
of a
on.
picture.
I
This was yesterday morning.
I'm gonna put it up. One second. I'm just getting everything together. Hold it.
I know you asked if we needed anything, but you couldn't have gotten here anyhow, so thank you.
Don't lose us while you're doing the other stuff.
Wait, here.
Get out, we had to go out on a dirt
Does
road.
everybody see what happened?
My.
Oh my God.
The back little hill part there that she went up was our back fence.
Oh, well.
What
Did
that
it
she
damage
painted.
your back fence then, Sandy?
Yeah, we put the fence back together today.
Okay.
Wow.
So we had about 6 or 7 Edison trucks, those real big ones, and there must have been 20 guys and sheriffs and fire and ambulances and then traffic control. It was
Glad it wasn't your car.
Thank God it wasn't
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
You and the car, yeah.
Right. She said,
Wow.
according to the sheriff, she swerved to avoid somebody that crossed over the line, but she didn't even have brakes. I mean, she didn't brake or anything. She just went right into that pole.
Oof.
Yeah.
Pretty
Pretty scary.
Right?
They did take her. She walked across the street before I got out there, but I think they did take her away in the ambulance.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully. So do you have a new pole now?
Yeah, they had to put in a totally new pole. And that was a replaced new pole, by the way. It was only a couple months old when Edison replaced it.
Oh, there's Diane. I was just about to send you again, Diane. You made it.
So that was the exciting yesterday, which is nothing compared to today.
Oh no, that was more exciting yesterday. A lot more exciting than what happened today.
So you know, the thing about what's going on right now, and I'm glad to see everybody here because yeah, I mean, who knew, you know, when we woke up this morning, that we'd be dealing with what we did. But
I don't think it's that much of a surprise.
well, some people would say yes, yeah, it was kind of happening and in the makings. But I will tell you that you know, we're this is kind of our oasis outside of politics to some extent, but I will tell you that it was exhausting for everybody to be part of this today. And I'm glad. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen tonight. And I will tell you this right now too. I am in the midst of a COVID crisis with families. It's not just people passing away, which it is, but it also is what it's doing for other people who, like I have somebody who unfortunately just passed away. The funeral is supposed to be tomorrow, but they can't release the body. The person died at Palmdale Hospital, and they can't release the body because because the morgue is so overwhelmed that they can't. And I called. I said, you know, would you like me to call and see what I can do? And I felt bad, hassling the hospital, but I said, look, Jewish tradition is, we're trying to bury people as soon as possible. And the nurse or the attendant or the administrator who I spoke to said, look, we're dealing with a crisis here. And I kind of felt like a jerk, but and I don't know that I was helpful, but the funeral is now on Friday. But yeah, people are going nuts right now. So again, I just hope everybody stays safe and healthy. Diane, how is your place up there?
We just keep hearing about LA County. I think we have problems here, but I'm kind of insulated. But I want to tell you, I got up at 5:30 this morning and I started again watching, Fox, CNN, C-SPAN. And I was on a Torah class and I didn't do anything till 11:30. I turned on the TV. I had such a visceral reaction. I couldn't breathe. I had to call my son. I was the one, Alan, in Massachusetts. He calmed me down. It was horrible.
I wanted to cry. It makes me so sad that I'm
Yeah.
watching this in our country, that I think about, well, my friend Roe, whose father fought in World War II. I mean, it just brought all this to the surface.
Yeah.
Well, I listened to Trump's speech and
Oh.
Rudy Giuliani, a secret drawer in a vending in a machine for the elections. I couldn't believe it. Awful.
Well,
Mitt Romney gave a really good speech just a
there's
few
been a
minutes
lot
ago.
of there's been a lot of good speeches tonight. I know I'm taking
Yeah.
people away from speeches, but I really do want to just make sure, Diane, you're staying safe and healthy.
I am.
I was concerned because Tracy is not going up to the Jewish home in San Francisco, but they've had an outbreak there at Jewish home in San Francisco. They've got 60 people at that facility now. They made it through until now without having any real, they had a few people, but not an outbreak. And now they're overwhelmed. So again, please everybody, and especially people living in more communal type settings, staying safe. But it is definitely, we're in the throes of it right now. And look, I mentioned it yesterday at Tuesday morning class. I was going to try to see if I can get vaccinated. I don't want to jump in line or take anybody else out, but I do want. I am now dealing with a lot of people that are being exposed, and I haven't turned down anybody. I haven't turned down anybody for a funeral, for any life cycle event, and I'm not going to. But I do want to, and I'm not on the front lines like people, but I do want to make sure I don't get anybody else sick.
Right.
I honestly, I'm not that worried about, I don't want to get it, but I'm not personally worried, but I am worried about exposing anybody else. So, and I would be, obviously I'd love to be seeing, I'd love to go over to see Joyce. I was going to talk to her maybe later about next time I can see her, but again, I want to keep everybody safe on my end. So, with that, I do just hope and pray that everybody is going to get through these next few weeks. And I did remember to put us up on Facebook. So we already have a couple of people watching us on Facebook. We may have some other people that'll join us, throughout the night. But I really do want to kind of use this time as a respite from politics. I think by this point, most of us have seen and heard pretty much everything. We're hearing a lot of great speeches from, there are hopefully we hope that good things will come out of this. But again, I wanted tonight to kind of step back and get back to the bigger issues, even bigger issues than our national issues, which are issues that keep us focused and really, as much as the Constitution is one of those documents that helped shape our world, the Torah has really shaped our world for thousands of years. And what's interesting about tonight's Torah portion is that it encompasses so many things that as I looked at it, I was like, we got to dive into this right away, because what's so strange, and I mentioned this the other day, yesterday, and I think last week too, and I actually mentioned it at Friday night services. We have a weird thing that's happening right now. We've come on ourselves that the Tuesday classes and the Wednesday classes have merged in and collided in the fact that what we're studying on Tuesday, we're now studying in the Torah. And so usually when we look at the Midrash, we'll flip back to the Torah occasionally. We'll look at what's in the Torah. Well, now we're actually reading what's in the Torah. And I kind of invited some of the Tuesday morning people to jump on today to kind of read this week's portion, especially in next week's portion, the beginning of Exodus, because we're reading this in Midrash right now. We're reading the stories of Moses and the birth of Moses. And then in today, we finish with his mission, his call at the burning bush. And what's so interesting is we've been reading this over the last couple of months on Tuesday mornings because there's so much Midrash on it. Even the burning bush took like 2 weeks just to go through the burning bush Midrash. Here in the Torah, that's like one of the things in the first chapter, in the first Parsha, and it's only one of the things. And so the burning bush is definitely the biggest part of Parshat Shemot, the part of Exodus that we're reading. But it's not the main part, or it's the largest part, but it's only one of the parts of Shemot, of Exodus. And what's interesting is what is really there and what's also not there. This is an example of, as we read today in the Torah, the Midrash is really necessary because there's so much we don't know that at least the Torah doesn't give us, that the Midrash has to fill in those blanks, and it has to really give us some background, because the Torah just doesn't give it to us, though we think it does. And that's because a lot of us are familiar with this Torah portion because we've seen the 10 Commandments and we've seen Moses, the lawgiver, which you may not remember, but that was Burt Lancaster's movie. There's also Prince of Egypt was the cartoon animated version. It was DreamWorks' first animation movie that they made. It's hard to believe 20 years ago, but they made that movie. And so there are a lot of versions of this story that we know. What's interesting is we're going to see a lot of it's not in the Torah. So we're going to get into this because just chapter 1 alone, and you know it also from Passover. And that's one of the things that, again, a lot of this chapter, especially chapter 1 and chapter 2, or really chapter 1, is right out of the Haggadah, right out of the text that we read at Passover. So let's take a look. And the words Shemot come from, the name of the title comes from the second word in the Torah portion. It says Ele Shemot, which Ele means these. It's just, it's not an integral word, but the word that we have, Shemot, means names. And it says, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household. And again, these are the tribes. But it does say from the beginning that this family came down as individuals, as children to their father Jacob or Israel. And it's interesting here is that it begins with both. Ele Shemot Bnei Yisrael. And Bnei Yisrael will be the term that we use for the Israelites. The sons of Israel, the Israelites, that's the words that we use. But here, the first time it's used, it really is both the children of Israel and the tribes of Israel. So again, later on, we use the word Bnei Israel throughout the Torah. We don't always talk about it, but every time we see the word Israelites, or every time we see the word children of Israel, we don't mean just the literal sons of Israel. We mean everybody who's a part of the 12 tribes. But here it kind of means both. These are the names of the sons of Israel, but also all of those descendants who came to Egypt with Jacob. And so it does kind of use both. It kind of reminds us that Jacob / Israel, remember he has both names. This guy, this paterfamilias, is also become an ancestor for a whole nation. And it does become a nation in the land of Egypt, which is interesting. We become a nation, not in our homeland. We become a nation in Egypt. And that's what we're going to read today. And we're going to read it very soon. So don't blink because it'll be over. So here are the sons by name: Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Now, what's interesting, of course, about this list, the way it's read out, it doesn't really have the normal order, with the exception of, or the order we normally have, though it starts with the first four. Okay, those are the first four. But then it kind of does something weird. It goes to Leah's other sons, then it goes to Rachel's son Benjamin, because Joseph, as we're going to see, is already there. And then we go to Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, who are the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. So this order is interesting because it doesn't go chronologically. It goes by the wife. It goes somewhat chronologically, because I guess it could have put Rachel's sons first, but it didn't. It put Leah's sons first, then Rachel's, and then Bilhah and Zilpah's. Interesting, right? So it's a little different order. And it says the total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt. Okay, there they are. And that's what it says about how they got there. Because the next line, it says, Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so that the land was filled with them. And again, this is not just the word pruervu, which is be fruitful and multiply, but also it says vaishretsu, that that they became like a swarm, that the land swarmed with them. And they also, it can see, they also multiplied, and vaya'atzmu me'od, and they became very strong, or they became, again, here it says they increased very greatly, but it also has this kind of understanding of they became like very powerful group in the land of Egypt. And it says the land was filled with them. And here's the key line, the line where everything shifts. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And that is the line where everything changes. Because up till now, everything is good. All that is assumedly good. Came down to Egypt, everyone's reunified. I mean, Joseph died, that's not nice. But, you know, he was 110. The other brothers lived even longer. We read in the Midrash, they actually lived longer than Joseph. But the time comes and they die, new generation. Things seems to be going well until that moment that a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And what does this king do? He said to this people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. And again, that word that was used before, atzum, doesn't only have a connotation of numerous, but also powerful, which is the way it's sometimes translated. Atzum is the same word that we use for atzmaut. It's the same root, which is kind of it's strength. It's national strength. So the Egyptians look at the Israelites and they say, they're too strong for us. They're too powerful for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise up from the ground. So again, the challenge to the Jews are that not only are they more powerful, but that in the case of a foreign attack, they will be a fifth column. And again, that line is right in the Haggadah, and we oftentimes reflect on it because it sounds eerily like other charges of anti-Semitism over the years, including even, unfortunately, in this country, when there was a Red Scare, when people said the Jews will fight with the communists against us, and they will be part of this fifth column in our country. And that was there was a time when we heard those sounds not just in Nazi Germany, but in the United States. And so the first phase is let us deal shrewdly with them. And so here's what it says they did. They set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pitom and Ramses. And the word that's used here is sarei misim, which in Hebrew is interesting. It literally means forced labor. It doesn't mean necessarily, and again, I know that you're going to say, well, we're splitting hairs here. But it doesn't say originally that they were slaves. It says they had to do forced labor. Now, forced labor may not mean that they were slaves all the time. It could mean that they had a certain period of time a year that they had to work for the government. We know this because the Egyptians did this to their own people. And so we know now that one of the ways that the Egyptians built these amazing pyramids and these other things is they would literally have their own citizens work for part of the year in an organized labor force that wasn't really slavery, but definitely different from kind of the way we work in our country, where they had to work for a certain period of time for the government in government labor. I will tell you this, which most people don't know. This phrase, sarei misim, which is translated here as forced labor, we find it one other place in the Bible. One other place in the Bible. What's interesting about that other place in the Bible is it wasn't another foreign nation that did it to us. According to the Bible, King Solomon put sarei misim, put taskmasters for labor over the Jewish people, the Israelites, when he was building the temple and when he was doing his own construction. So it's interesting that the phrase doesn't pop up a lot in the Bible, and the other time that it does, it's a Jewish king that actually forces his citizens to do work.
Is that like a tax over the people? You'll work for us instead of paying us money or crops.
Correct. Okay. Now this what's interesting about this, of course, is that again, at this point, though, it doesn't necessarily seem as though, and again, it kind of, I'm only raising this because it kind of goes against your image of what happened. But I think it's an important distinction, and I'm not splitting hairs here, because what I really want you to see is that what happened to the Israelites under the Egyptians was really a process. It wasn't like the Israelites woke up one day and found all their rights taken away and that they were killed. And what, again, this is reminiscent of is the Nuremberg laws and what happened to Jews in Germany. They didn't wake up in concentration camps. They had the Nuremberg laws from 1935 to 38 that stripped them of their civil rights, that stripped them of their ability to own property and to have places in the universities and where they could open up businesses and that they could have Gentiles working for them in certain cases. All of these things were laws that the Nazis passed before they put people into concentration camps and eventually death camps. So again, it is reminiscent of what happens when obviously the Jews are one example, but it's happened in other situations where people's rights were gradually eroded, and it's a process. And so the first process is that they have to work for the Egyptians. That's the first step. But it says that the more they oppress them, and clearly this isn't good, because the word Yanu means that they were oppressed by it. It wasn't a good thing that they were doing this work. I don't want to make it seem like, well, it was just work. It was not good. It says that they were oppressed and stripped of at least some of their liberties. But it didn't matter because they increased and they spread out even more. And the Egyptians began to dread the Israelites. And that's the word that's used here, that they actually were in fear of the Israelites. It wasn't just that they hated them, but that they feared them. Interesting, right? So it's backfiring. The system of forced labor is not working. And then it says the Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites, which is this phrase the farech, which is again very, again, we read it in English in the Haggadah, but this line is actually used exactly in the Haggadah, and it actually seems like it's another step that they then took the next step of ruthlessly imposing, and the rabbis knew that, because it's not just in the Haggadah where they comment on it, but it's also kind of in our minds. We should notice this step, because it seemed as though this wasn't just working in the cities anymore, that they actually, farech is actually new kinds of work that they gave them. And what the rabbi said in the Haggadah, in the Midrash, thousands of years ago, was that this now was work that was even more, in some cases they say, the commentary is that it was worthless, that it was work that had no purpose, that they weren't building cities anymore. They were just like breaking rocks by the side of the road. I mean, that's the image that I have, is that they're kind of doing work that just is dehumanizing and has no purpose. So they're literally just banging, on a wall, and it doesn't have any purpose, which again is harder work. And there's the word actually vayavdu, which is, when we have the word eved, that's not just work, that's enslavement. And again, as we pointed out, we read that Pharaoh and Joseph did that to the Egyptians when they took the power away from them, took their property away from them. That we read this, that Pharaoh and Joseph, they enslaved the Egyptians to Pharaoh, and we wrote Avadim leFaro, that they were slaves to Pharaoh. So here we have the word eved. Here we have the word now. We have the word enslaved, or working now, not just as that. And here is what it says: the various labors that they made them perform ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor and mortar and bricks, with all sorts of tasks in the field. And again, that word farech appears again, which they don't say it again as ruthless or imposition. It's really kind of weird how they translate that, but they should say again that the word farech is used again, that this is backbreaking, heartbreaking, emotionally destructive, crushing work on these people. And then we have the word here too, vayir mararu. They made it maror, it made him bitter, and that's where we get the bitter herb from. And we say that why do we have the bitter herb? Because they made our lives bitter, and that's where it comes from. And then of course the mortar and bricks is where we get the haroset from, right? So we start to see this these words being translated into the foods that we eat at Passover, and it becomes real for us as we eat those foods and we experience that. We think what it was like. Okay, now we get into the next stage. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. One of them was named Shifra and the other was named Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them, and they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they've given birth. And God dealt with the midwives, dealt well with them. He made it good for them, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Now, this is actually, as you can see, the story of the midwives goes on for, and again, there's a dialogue here. It starts in verse 15 and it goes to verse 21. So that's 7 verses that we have about the midwives. It's quite it's about a third of the chapter so far is just the dialogue and the exchange back and forth with the midwives. So this is a little story that, again, it's pretty important when we think about how little information we have. That we have this situation where the midwives helped and risked their lives and lied, knowing that they could be killed, and saved the Jewish babies. Now, we have different takes on this. And again, whenever we read this, we kind of have to ask ourselves about the midwives. And I do want to point out, because they are the first that are mentioned in, and again, I would direct you to read, if you're not reading it, read Rabbi Sax's Devar Torah on this week's portion, because he wrote, and I think he's written one of these, he had written one before. Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory, who had we shared his Divrei Torah over the years. He wrote about the amazing women in this week's portion, and these are the first two women. But we have to kind of ask ourselves the question every year: were these women Jews or Hebrews, or were they not, or were they Gentiles? Were they Egyptians? Now you could say, well, it doesn't really matter, because they're just really good people, really heroic women. And again, the first of many heroic women we read about in this week's Parsha. But it does need to be asked, because if they are indeed Gentiles, then they are the first righteous Gentiles that we know of, man or woman, who risked their lives for the Jewish people. That they literally put their lives at risk to help us. And if they are, then they start a amazing tradition of people who stuck their necks out and braved anti-Semitism and violence, and in some cases were martyred and killed to help the Jewish people. And of course, in Israel today, we recognize those people, especially from the Holocaust, as righteous Gentiles. One of the most powerful memorials at Yad Vashem, the Israel Museum of the Holocaust, is the Garden of Righteous Gentiles, where a tree is planted for every one of those people who risked their lives, and in some cases gave their lives, to save Jews during the Holocaust. And as you walk through the lane of the righteous Gentiles, and you see names, some of them that you know well because they've made their stories into movies, whether it's Oskar Schindler or Irina Sendler. Again, some amazing movies that have been told on these people, or people who people don't know as well, including Senpo Sugihara from Japan, who saved thousands of Jews and got them to China and saved them, gave them visas to get out of Lithuania while he was the consul there. Was able to save thousands of Jews, and again, a Japanese bureaucrat who risked going against his own government, allies of the Nazis. Those kinds of stories are just amazing, and they are hopeful stories, and they remind us of the best of humanity when we see them. And we as Jews always talk about them, because they remind us, again, for all the anti-Semitism and all the horrible things that happen, there are some amazing people who become our heroes. And the midwives might be those first two examples, and therefore they're the ancestors to some extent of all the people that come after. Look, some of the rabbis thought that they actually were Jewish and that they were midwives to the Hebrews because they were indeed Hebrews. There's actually, of course, one of the midrashim that we read in the last few weeks was that these two people, Shifra and Puah, are none other than Yocheved and Miriam, Moses' mother and sister, who display their heroism early on. It's a tough one because, again, the rabbis want to know that these people didn't disappear, and of course they don't disappear, but there seems to be this idea that God protected them and did something for them. Now, if they were Jewish or Hebrews and they simply defended and protected their own people, which is also something that they risked their lives doing, have no fear, because we have, without a doubt, a righteous Gentile that we're going to read about in next chapter. Not too far from now, we're going to read for sure of one who is that righteous Gentile. You might already guess who that woman is. And again, it's another woman. But again, it says he made houses, established households for them, that they became mothers or ancestors of their own right. So interesting question to ask. And again, something to reflect on. No matter what, though, they are the first of a few really phenomenal women in this week's portion. So that doesn't work. And then the last line we have here is the next step, which is that Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So at that point, Pharaoh says, I'm not leaving it up to a couple people, all the country is going to work at this. And it says all his people. So now anybody, everybody essentially is now responsible for finding those Jewish babies, which made it very, very difficult, obviously. And it also now at this point makes all of Egypt that participates in this, right? Again, there might have been individuals who are righteous Gentiles, but the average Egyptian now is complicit in genocide. And that's important because we know, without ruining the story, I'm not going to ruin the story for you, but in next chapter and the next chapter after that, we're going to read about Egyptians being punished. We're going to read the next two parshas, right? Next week and the week after, Vaira and Bo are all about the 10 plagues. I'm not going to ruin it for you. You know the 10 plagues. But again, when we talk about why did the average Egyptian have to suffer if it was just the Pharaoh? Well, folks, the Pharaoh couldn't have extinguished and annihilated Jewish lives without his people being a part of it. And the Torah tells us that, yeah, that's what they did. They were complicit in the murder of Jewish infants, at least the male infants. And that's the end of chapter 1. A lot there. Now watch chapter 2, because now we shift to that guy. And this is the way it begins, the story of Moses. And it says, a certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. And I will tell you, and we talked about it in the Midrash, that it says, Vayikach et bat Levi, that he took a daughter of the Levites. This is the way they translate it, a Levite woman. But literally, bat Levi, some of the rabbis assumed was that the woman that's not, by the way, mentioned here by name, we don't learn her name here, was not only a Levite woman, but was in fact a daughter of Levi, the ancestor and the named ancestor, the son of Jacob, which would make Yocheved, who we later do learn her name, it would make her only one generation removed from, her father was one of the 12 tribes. He was the ancestor of all the Levites. It would also make her husband's aunt, which means that the man who will also be later named Amram would have been the nephew of this woman Yocheved. And so she essentially married her nephew, which if they're of slightly different, if she was really a young sister of his father, then, she could have been, 18, 19 years younger than her dad. And maybe they were around the same age. The rabbis didn't have a problem with that, by the way. They didn't have later on, it's against the Torah law to marry your aunt, but your father's sister, as they would say. But it may have been, I wouldn't say permissible, but it could have been understood under these circumstances that the Israelites were in a bad situation, and it was better for you to marry a relative than not to be married, or whatever, however you want to say it. It says the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. I don't really like that translation because it seems to imply that if he wasn't beautiful, she wouldn't have kept him around. So I don't love that translation, but it is ki tov, which doesn't have to be beautiful. It's the same word that we have when God looks at the world as he's creating it and says, tov, this is good. it could mean healthy. It could mean correct, or I would probably use the word healthy, or sustainable would be another word, because she's risking her life to keep him alive. And by the way, the rabbis pick up on this because she's not only risking her life, a baby's life, but the rabbi said that the punishment for people who did this was that their whole families got murdered, which could have been the case. That if you didn't follow the rule and give up your son, all your kids got killed, which means the older siblings, which in this case would have been Aaron, his older brother, and Miriam, his older sister, would have also perished. So keeping this baby alive would have jeopardized everyone. So that is part of the reason why what Miriam does here is very courageous, very scary, and also now gives us our second very courageous woman. Because interestingly, and we read this in the Midrash, Moses' father was going to comply with the rule of giving up his son. It was the mother, and that's what it says here, that she was the one who hit him. It kind of implies here perhaps that the father didn't want to go along with that. And again, it's not that he wanted his son to die. It's just he wanted his other kids to live. And maybe he wanted to live. Again, especially in the ancient world when a very high percentage of children died in infancy, that might have been part of the equation, if you will, and a horrific equation. A horrific equation. Folks, I know people who had to make this equation during the Holocaust. One of them was a friend of my mom's. Unfortunately, she's still alive. I mean, my mom passed away, but her good friend, she found out later, she had an older sister who died during the war so that the rest of the people hiding could live. Imagine finding out as an adult woman that you had a sister that I can't even wrap my head around it, even as I say it. So this happened. So this isn't just ancient history. There are people walking around who had siblings who didn't survive so that the family could survive. Yeah. So that's what happens. But of course, when she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. So here we read about the next righteous woman. So this is the fourth righteous woman we read about. Shifra, Pua, Yocheved, the mother, and then Miriam. Not also mentioned, by the way, I will say. Her name isn't given here, but now we have the sister. Now I will tell you again, it goes against our vision of what happens here, which is that he's not put into the Nile River for the Nile River to take him down wherever it goes. He's put in the bank, by the banks and in amongst the reeds. He can't move. He's not going to go down the Nile willy-nilly and again at a risk. He was placed in a certain place and he was guarded the whole time. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. She opened it. She saw it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." So she knows right away. She knows right away what's happening. That's for sure. The question of whether this was a setup, the question of whether, again, they're risking Moses' life is 100% a risk. But knowing that there is an Egyptian princess who's going to find this, again, it doesn't give us her name, not yet. Right? It says Bat Paro, the daughter of Pharaoh. That's her name so far, Bat Paro. And she knows. It says, his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter answered, yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. That's it. Because when the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son, and she named him Moses, explaining, I drew him out of the water. Folks, I mean, that's all we have. This amazing story of Moses surviving birth, surviving a death sentence, and winding up being nursed, by the way, by his own mother, which people forget. So this idea that he was taken away from his mother and never saw his mother again is not the case at all. We don't know how long it took for him to come back to Pharaoh's daughter, because it says when the child grew up. Now, if we say that it's when he's weaned, that means maybe he's 2 or 3 or 4 in those days, but could have been even longer. But it says that she named him. And Moses carried a name that his mother, adopted mother, gave him. And the rabbis kind of comment on this. They love this idea that Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and then gave him a name. But it also, of course, begs the question, what was his original name? Torah doesn't tell us. The Torah never tells us what Moses' real name was. And one of the midrashim that we read a couple weeks ago was that there are actually 7 names. Everybody gave Moses a name. His mom gave him a name. His dad gave him a name. His sister gave him a name. Everybody gave him a name. They all gave him a name. Seriously, they all gave him a name. Those of you who were with us Tuesday morning know some of those names that were given to him. They all gave him a name. But the name that sticks for Moses is the one that Pharaoh's daughter gives him, the Egyptian name. And the rabbis take this as a really important lesson, because at the end of the day, the woman who saved his life, the woman who really made sure Moses could exist, was Pharaoh's daughter. This last woman that we read of, who's the hero of Moses' life. Actually, not the last woman, because we're going to read Zipporah, but the last woman who makes him who he is, or that makes him, who saves him, who makes sure he can live. Right. And who saves Jewish babies. And this woman is no doubt a righteous Gentile. And the rabbis always know that, because even if Shifra and Puah are not Egyptian, Pharaoh's daughter is Egyptian. Pharaoh's daughter is Egyptian. No question. You can't get more Egyptian than being Pharaoh's daughter. And what's beautiful about this is the rabbis also recognize the power of adoption, what happens when someone is adopted.
And isn't he raised like a prince?
Well, we see that. Well, we're going to get to that, Joyce. That's the next line, because we're not really sure how Egyptian Moses knows he is. We assume that he's raised as a prince because of, again, the Midrash, the movies we've read, everything we've been fed seems to give us this idea that Moses is raised more Egyptian than Jewish. But without a doubt, the name that he carries, which ironically, of course, is the name that I carry because I'm named after him. Everyone who's been named Moshe for the last 3,000 years is named Egyptian, has an Egyptian name because of this remarkable woman. And so the rabbis said something very interesting about this. They pointed this out. Bat Paro ends up having her name changed. The Bible tells us later on that her name is Bat Yah. Originally, she's Bat Paro, and we don't know if we assume she had another name, Nefertiti or Nefertiri or some Egyptian goddess. We never know that name. We never know it. We never know Moses' name. We never know her name because it doesn't really matter. The only name that she's known as in the Bible, the only name we know her as, besides Bat Paro, which really isn't a name, it's a title, is Bat Yah. the daughter of God. And the rabbis say, because you made him your son, I'm going to make you my daughter. And that's why she becomes Batya. That God changes her name to Bithia or Batya because of what she did, because of her act of heroism, this final act of survival for Moses, which again helps the whole people of Israel survive. This one remarkable woman who was raised by Pharaoh. Which Pharaoh? Was it the Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph? Was that her father or was that her brother? And remember, the Pharaohs married their sisters. So she could have been the wife of the Pharaoh who didn't know, could have been his mother, could have been his grandmother, could have been his sister, could have been lots of those things, could have been more than one of those things. But this woman who had every reason to not like the Israelites and be complicit and be like everybody else does something remarkable. And that's why Bat Paro, to some extent, is really the hero. You know, they're all heroes, but she's really the hero that names him. And again, but we have a weird word here because it says his name is Moshe because I brought him out of the water, Mashitehu, which is weird because that's a Hebrew word. So that's not his name. His name is not just Moshe. And we've mentioned this before. And apologies if I've said it before. This is the biblical reason why he's named Moshe, but it's not his real reason why he's called Moshe. The reason we know that is because the word here, Mashitehu, is Hebrew. It's not Egyptian. She brought him out of the water and named him something because she brought him out of the water. The most likely version is that she named him something to do with the god of whatever, maybe the god of the Nile, maybe Tut Moshe, maybe Ram Moshe, maybe Sobek Moshe. Something came before the name Moshe because the word Moshe is the Egyptian word for from the god of. It means from the god of. So from the god Ra is Ra Moshe or Ramses. Tut Moshe is from the god Tut. His name was something Moshe. Egyptian, 100% Egyptian, and had another god's name in it. So we know that. I mean, we know it because it totally makes sense. But the Bible already gave us an answer for why it was and why it was Moshe and just Moshe and only Moshe. And we don't know the other part of it. We don't know what his Egyptian part of Moshe is Egyptian, but we don't know what the other Egyptian word there was. We don't know what God's name got excised from Moses's name. Could have been Ramosha too. Ramses was a very common name. We know because we have a bunch of pharaohs named Ramses. We sometimes think that the pharaoh who's in this story is named Ramses because in every movie, his name is Ramses. Ramses IV, probably. But we don't know. There were a lot of Ramoshes. And again, Ramses is the Greek version of the Egyptian. So Ramosha is the more Egyptian way of saying it. Anyways, the point is that we have this wonderful story of Moses's birth, Moses's naming, and the fact that Pharaoh's daughter makes it all happen. The problem is, and getting back to Joyce's question or point, is we don't know what happened. Because in the next verse, it says sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. And you know what happens next. He turned this way and that and see no one about. He struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. Folks, that's it. He's an older man now, old enough to beat and kill an Egyptian. And we don't know how Egyptian he was. We don't know what had happened to him. We don't know what made him finally, was he totally oblivious to what was happening to us? I mean, we assume that maybe he really didn't know what was going on, and maybe he was raised by the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's court, because he doesn't seem to know what's going on. Like suddenly he saw it. Like, didn't he see it before? Did he Did he not know? Does he suddenly know? How does he know? We don't know. We don't know. So everything here is midrash. Everything here is speculation. Everything here is our imagination for what makes Moses finally stand up. What made him suddenly realize that something had to be done. But his first act is an act of vengeance. It's an act of impulse. It's an act of let's say it's an act of violence. And he knows it's violent. He knows he did something wrong. He knows he did something he can get in trouble because it says he turned this way and that. It was premeditated. The idea that he somehow fought with the guy, which by the way is in the movie Prince of Egypt, where he pushes the Egyptian taskmaster off of the scaffolding, which is a wonderful idea, which that Moses, and again, maybe for a cartoon version that's going to be watched by kids, we don't want to make him make this act premeditated. But folks, these words, he turned this way, that way, and see no one about, that's premeditation. That's premeditation. He knows what he's going to do. He wanted to get away with it, but of course he doesn't. When he went out the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting. So he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" So here's Moses intervening again. This time he's intervening with two Israelites fighting, two Hebrews. He retorted, "Who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was frightened and thought, then the matter is known. So how does he know that he's been caught or he's been found out? Because one of the Hebrews tells them. They already know. And so he's frightened and he says, I'm going to get caught. People know. I thought no one saw it, but clearly people know. And of course, it says that they found out. It wasn't just Moses panicking and saying, oh, I'm going to get caught. Pharaoh learned of the matter and he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and he arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well. So I want to point this out as I do every year, and you're going to be sick of it if you get to know me for many, many, many more years, because every time I'll read this, I'll say the same thing. We just read 15 lines of Torah, and this is all we know about Moses's life, childhood, from the moment he's born to this moment that he's sitting down in the land of Midian beside a well. That's all we know. It's 15 lines. 15 lines. That's it. That's it. We don't know. It's a mystery. Everything that we know about it, that we've seen in a movie, everything that we've heard, that we've read, that we've in our minds is there from Midrash. Every idea that he was a prince, that he learned about his identity through, a song, a cloth, like it is in Ten Commandments. Whatever we think we know about Moses, it's because people have tried to give us those midrashim that are beautiful midrashim, and they try to answer the question of who is Moses. But folks, your answer, assuming that you're basing it on the text and on, your guess is as good as anybody's. And creating that midrash about what you think Moses's life was like probably reflects a little bit on what your life was like, on what your life was, what life was like for you as a perhaps assimilated American or somebody who lived in two worlds like most of us. Much of what we have about Moses in our minds is, again, been created by other people. And to some extent, if we're really honest about it, is a projection of our own feelings as people who live in two worlds. A cultural world that's very powerful. And if Moses was indeed raised as an Egyptian, he is assimilated, maybe not fully aware or fully concerned with his people. And then something finally snaps. And it does happen. We know that these things happen. and we know that some of the greatest Jewish leaders of all time, including the modern version of Moses, Theodore Herzl, was one of those people. And he realized, and of course he did see himself as a modern day Moses. He cultivated that aura, but he had a similar situation. He was raised in a very assimilated home in Budapest in Hungary, where he was brought up, and later on in Vienna and Paris and some of the places that he lived as a Western European. This was not a guy who spoke Yiddish. He spoke German. He was not a guy who was religious. He never celebrated a bar mitzvah when he was 13. Never. He didn't read Torah. He was an assimilated Jew, not religious at all. And what happened to him, as many of you know, was when he was covering the Dreyfus trial in France, the trial of Dreyfus, who was accused of being a spy for the Germans, a French, honorable French general who was a victim of an anti-Semitic smear campaign, a conspiracy to frame him. He realized that Jews, including him, including Dreyfus, people who had arrived at the highest level of society in Western Europe, were not protected from anti-Semitism. That for all the rationality and for all the enlightenment and for all the advancement of Western Europe, anti-Semitism had not gone away. And of course, he tragically died in 1904. He was only 40 when he, young 40s when he died. He never got to see modern day Israel, but he never got to see his own family survive. And he never had, none of his children, his 3 children, survived beyond the 1940s. I mean, none of them got to see Israel established. They all died tragically. And one child that committed suicide, one that died in concentration camps. I mean, this was a tragedy in his own family that his family did not, there's nobody named Herzl that lives in Israel or anywhere else for that matter, who got to see that legacy out. He was very much like a Moses who came to his Judaism and his Jewish identity later on in life. So there are parallels in our world, and there are stories of Jews who've kind of arrived at their Jewish identity later in life. They maybe didn't have the impact of a Moses or Herzl, but it's never too late for people to embrace and become Jewish leaders in major ways. In major ways. By the way, one of the best examples that I knew, and I actually met him once, was Edgar Bronfman, who kind of took on this role as being a Jewish philanthropist later in life. He was the head of the Seagram's company, and I think I met him about 20 years ago, probably 10 years before he passed. And I met him while he was starting to get, as he had gotten more involved in Jewish philanthropy. And he was one of the original funders of the Birthright Trip. He was one of the original people who said, again, with some of his other wealthier Jewish philanthropists, said, we need to make sure every Jewish kid can go to Israel. And so the Bronfmans made sure that could be a reality. And he wrote a autobiography about his Jewish leadership. And there are other people who've done that to some extent too later in life. They've gotten involved. In some cases, they become students of Torah. They go to rabbinical school. I've met a lot of people who have lived their lives in a different world and then taken on their Jewish identity in very real and meaningful ways. And again, some of them have turned their assets and their wealth into amazing Jewish projects. But some of the people, again, have been great teachers of Torah and have been able to be wonderful individuals who've used their Jewish identity to bring comfort to people, and they're not as famous or well known, but I've had the good fortune to meet several of them, and it happens a lot. We have a lot of people that nowadays go back to rabbinical school or start studying and make a big difference in little ways. But and again, sometimes it's just with one person, but they are able to spread Torah. So Moses is, we don't know how old he is when he makes this journey. Could have been in his 40s. Could have been younger. He could have been in his 40s when he starts his life again, as we're going to see in the land of Midian. So this next chapter of his life starts, not the new chapter of the Bible. We're only 15 verses in. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to the water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off, and Moses rose to their defense, and he watered their flock. So this is another story like we had with our patriarchs of a guy like Jacob who takes care of the flocks, waters the flocks, rises up to take care of a woman, and in this case, women, the 7 daughters of the priest of Midian, who again is not named yet. We're going to see him in a second. They come back to Reuel and they said, "How is it that you've come back so soon today?" Which again, as we talked about in Midrash class, seems to imply that this situation of the daughters getting hassled at the well happened more than once. But today something different happened.
Rabbi, before you
Yeah.
go on,
Yeah.
is this the only time that Jethro is called Reu in the
It's not. It's
Torah?
not. So it's not the only time he's called Reuel. But again, Yitro, as we also know, is known by other names. So sometimes he's known as Yeter, which is very close to Yitro. Sometimes he's called Reuel. And why is he called different names? Well, obviously one of the speculations is it's different authors. But one of the interesting things about it is that, again, the rabbis kind of interpreted that he takes on a new name because he does certain things. When he takes on this new role as being Moses' father-in-law again, but it's not the last time he's called this. So you can't say, well, he's never called Reuel again. So Reuel literally means like a friend of God, Reuel, or a kinsman of God.
So is it possible that one of these names is actually, since he was the king of Midian, that means king?
Priest. He's a priest.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Look, the word Reuel definitely has the name God in it. So not Yud-He-Vav-He God, not the name Lord, the Hashem name, but it has the name El, which means God. Reuel would definitely seem to be more of the priestly name, but we're not 100% sure. The rabbis definitely speculate that that's one of the reasons why he's known by these different names. And again, one of the things we read, and you probably remember this, Mike, is that the reason that his daughters get harassed is because according to the Midrash, Yitro / Reuel makes a break from his priestliness of being a priest of Midian, and he starts to question this idea of the Midianite gods, the pantheon, and says, you know what, there's just one God. And the Midianites, his tribe turns on him, and they turn on the daughters and start treating them like garbage because their father is an apostate, essentially, right? He's gone from being the priest of Midian to being, this heretic, right? So that's one of the midrash that kind of reconciles this, and how is this guy dealing with this? But definitely having 7 daughters is quite an accomplishment. Now, of course, when he asks them, how is it that you've come back? They answered, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us in the flock. And he said to the daughters, where is he then? Why did you leave that man? Ask him to break bread. So it says that Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as wife. Well, it doesn't say he gave her the wife the next day, but however long it took, Moses starts off helping them and winds up again as this man's son. And again, maybe because Moses was a hero already for them, he stood up for them. Again, the possibility that no one else wanted to marry Yitro's Yitro's daughters because he's a heretic, and here's a guy who comes from somewhere else and is a perfect mate. Look, we don't know. And what's so weird about this, of course, is that they call him an Egyptian. And interestingly, by the way, at this point, he doesn't correct them. He doesn't correct them. Now, he might not have been there when, in all fairness, he might have not been there when they said, because it says, like, where is he? Like, he's not there at that moment. So it could be that that he doesn't hear him. But the rabbis do say that he does get punished because he didn't correct them, which seems to mean like he never corrected them. Like he never told them who he really was. He never says, oh, and by the way, I'm not an Egyptian, which by the way, then gets to Joyce's original point, which is, where do we get this idea that Moses is an Egyptian? Where do we get this idea that he's raised as an Egyptian prince? Well, it seems to be
the haircut and the clothes and the manners.
Exactly. So that's where the rabbis, and again, in the movie, The Prince of Egypt, by the time that Moses gets to the well, he's already like completely parched, and he's like he barely can make it there. And the only thing that's left of him that's still Egyptian in the movie is a ring, which is a scarab ring, which indicates that he's Egyptian. They know he's Egyptian from his ring. But this concept of, again, Moses' identity not really being clear, it seems to be there because they think he's an Egyptian by, again, maybe his clothes and his dress. So at least by the time that Moses is there in Midian, they think he looks Egyptian. To an outsider, he doesn't look like a Hebrew. Now, again, the Midianites, as we know, as we talked about before, they're descendants of Abraham. They're Abrahamic people. Now, they're clearly not Jews. They don't worship God, or at least they don't seem to worship God. They seem to be, they seem to be worshiping in some other way that they don't worship the same as Jews. But and we learn later on, the Midianites are one of our, I wouldn't say enemies, but they're one of the peoples that we can sometimes find ourselves opposed to. But the point here is that we have a guy who they think is Egyptian, who's not, and they're living, if not on the fringes of society, they don't seem to be really living. It seems to be a little difficult for them. And so here's Moses now in one environment as a Hebrew living as an Egyptian, to now a Hebrew living as an Egyptian who's now living as a Midianite. Just keep that in mind. I mean, this is a guy whose identity is constantly, to some extent, in flux until the next chapter. She bore him a son named Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Gershom literally means I was a stranger there. But here it says, I was a stranger in a strange land, which means that assumedly his strange land is Midian. Yeah. But he's been a stranger to some extent in a foreign land his whole life, if you think about it, as an Israelite being raised as an Egyptian. A long time after that, and it doesn't say how long, it just says a long time after that, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out. And their cry for help from bondage rose to God. God heard their moaning, and God remembered the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites and took notice of them. And this is the part that's also in the Haggadah. This is the part that says that the Israelites cried out. Now, what's interesting about this is it says that they cried out. It's right there that they cried out and that God remembered. Now, what happens? Look, the understanding is that we just read the king of Egypt died. Now, the interesting thing that the commentators, the rabbis, thousands of years ago said, wow, maybe it got worse. Maybe it got worse. The next Pharaoh was even worse than the previous Pharaoh. So things got worse under that. And that's when they started really crying out. We read in the Midrash class yesterday that it got even worse again when Moses and Aaron start telling Pharaoh, let my people go. Because the Torah does say that at that point, the Pharaoh turns to the people, and we're going to read it. We're going to read it next week. That after Moses and Aaron come, he says, you got to make your own bricks now. Pharaoh says, you think it was bad then, but before yesterday? Tomorrow it's even going to be worse, because tomorrow you're going to have to get your own bricks. You're going to have to do the same work and make your own bricks. So again, a lesson, and I mentioned it yesterday, it's a reminder that sometimes, again, it gets darkest before the dawn, which right now, that might be the lesson. That might be the lesson for today, with everything on around us. And I think we'll be in that case, hopefully, starting to see the light next week. But it's tough. Right now, we're definitely in a dark place. But here, the Torah is that when the people started groaning and moaning and crying out, they cried out. That's what made God read. Because why didn't God do something sooner? Why didn't God do something before? And the rabbis pointed out that's because Israel actually had to do something. They actually had to wake up and say, this is horrible. We can't live like this, which is weird because you'd think they would have said something before, like when their babies were being murdered. But maybe they didn't. I mean, this is the first time that it says that they cried out. And the rabbis point out, and it's in the Haggadah, that that's when God, I mean, the Torah says God took notice of them. They actually had to do something in order for God to react, which is weird because you'd think they would have. You'd also have to ask the question, why does God need us to do something? But the lesson is that, God didn't require them to do much, but God did require them to actually say, enough is enough, God, please help us.
Well, they always say now the squeaky wheel is the one that gets the oil.
Right.
And they're squeaking.
And again, it doesn't say that they cried out before. And
Right.
the rabbis point out that the cries of the Israelites are what God reacted to. God had to react to something, which again is so strange because you'd think that they would have. But did they not? Did people become so beaten down and so to some extent, did they become so accepting of their fate that they didn't cry out even? I mean, it kind of
It
boggles
seems
the
that
mind.
way because when they were in the desert, they were complaining about we had better food, we had this, we had that, we didn't worry. So they weren't crying out. They were satisfied with decent food.
Yep. And this is what's so strange about what we're seeing here when we really look at it. Is it possible, again, given what we read a few weeks ago, where the Egyptians were also enslaved by the Pharaoh, that by our standards and by our expectations and by what we've been blessed with, is it impossible maybe for us to ever really consider how horrible life was for many, many people for much of human history? The idea of freedom and the idea of some of the liberties that we take for granted and the life that we live is so different and so much better than life was like for our ancestors. Is it difficult for us to understand that maybe life was bad for them under Egyptians? I'm not saying it wasn't, but maybe the gap between life for them versus the Egyptians, or what life was like between what their life could have been like otherwise was not as great as we would like to believe.
Mhm.
And that far more of the world was enslaved in certain periods of history than we really can wrap our heads around. And so this is the weird thing for us. Thankfully, the idea that people wouldn't have cried out is astounding to us. But it is quite possible. It is quite possible that, again, life as a slave was not wholly that much different than being an average Egyptian in those days. And that Egyptians maybe dealt with the same kinds of craziness that they did for part of the time. That maybe occasionally the Pharaoh would look at a group in Egypt and say, you know what, there's too many of those people also. You see that city over there where there's too many people? Too many of them there. Get rid of them. It happened, folks. It happened throughout human history. And we actually read it in the Torah, which I only pointed it out this last, 2 weeks ago when we read it, because most people read it and never pay attention to it. It says that Joseph and Pharaoh, when they were nationalizing Egypt, they took people and moved them all around the country. They said, you're not living here anymore. The Torah actually says that that's what happened. And because you just read it. So what life was like for them versus what life was like for an average Egyptian might not have been as different as you and I would like to think. And again, in other times in Jewish history, may not have been as horrific as, or it was horrific, but not as recognizably horrific as it is for us today, where we look at it and go, this is literally a nightmare.
And the concept of freedom and free choice to move and do and think and do whatever you want is not an old one. It is new.
And we forget that.
Mhm.
We forget how new it is in human history. It is a very new idea. And again, we take it for granted because we live in a country. And again, we want to think about what we're hearing today. It is the other part of this. This book of Exodus is all about liberty and freedom. And we
Mhm.
take it for granted because we live in a country that enshrines those ideals of liberty and freedom. So
Yes.
here we go. And we got about a little over a half hour, and we're halfway through. So we're gonna move through chapter 3 fairly quickly, which is weird because, again, as I mentioned, the Midrash has a whole lot to say about this section, probably because, again, it's a huge chapter. It's a huge part of the text. And this is the burning bush. And you'll see how quickly we get to the burning bush. Well, you can see it's the next verse. Now, Moses tending the flock of his father-in-law Yitro, and here he's named Yitro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, again, here's the weird thing. We have two names for Yitro and Reuel. We actually have a couple others, but we also have two names for the mountain of God. Here, the first time we read it, it's Horeb. You know it as Mount Sinai. Both of those names are given, but according to the Torah, the same place where the burning bush happens is the same place where the people will come back to during the time of Mount Sinai, of getting the law, the moment at Mount Sinai. So that's the same place. And it's known by two different names. And it says, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame. Yet the bush was not consumed. And that's the famous line. V'hasneh einenu echol. It's not consumed. It's not burning. It's on fire, but it's not burning. And so Moses sees this and says, Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? And when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Hineni, here I am. Moses's Hineni is at the bush. Moshe, Moshe. And it does say it twice. Moshe, Moshe. So here it says that God spoke to him. So it says an angel of the Lord was there at the beginning, but here it says the Lord spoke to him. And God said, do not come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. I am, he said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So the very first time that Moses sees God, or again, not God, but the burning bush, realizes that he's seen a vision of God, that Moses was afraid. And he hid his face. That's the word. Vayaster Moshe banav. He hid his face. What's interesting about this, folks, is this is the same words that we have when we talk about God hiding his face, that God hid his face. Moses hides his face from God, and later on, we hear that God hides his face. The hidden face of God. It's not literally the face of God, obviously, but it's the realization or the vision of God in front of us. Not that God's disappeared, but that God's hiding. Very important distinction, by the way.
Mhm.
And the Lord continued, I've marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I'm mindful of their sufferings. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And again, there we have that list of the Canaanites, all the people that are living in the land. So it says, I'm rescuing them from Egypt. I'm going to bring them out of Egypt, but I'm not just rescuing them. I'm bringing them to their next land, to the place they're going to live, to a land flowing with milk and honey. So again, it's a redemption, it's a rescue, but it's also importantly, right away, I'm not just taking them out, I'm bringing them somewhere else. Now, the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. So God says, they're not, they're my people. I mean, you're an Israelite, I guess, that's part of it, but they're my people. And I'm going to send you to do it. And here we have Moses' challenge. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? And so Moses says, Mi anochi. Who am I? That's literally what it says. Who am I? And he said, I will be with you. That shall be your sign that was I who sent you. And when you have freed them from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. And so he tells them, you're going to come back here. This is where you're going to come back. When they get out, they're coming back here. When they're free, they're coming to this spot. And that's pretty powerful too, because we forget that part. We kind of think, oh, they went to Mount Sinai and that's where they got the 10 Commandments. Yeah, but think about that spot, because Moses hears it the moment that he's going to liberate the people, that this place is where they're going to have this experience. At this place where you're at right now. And that must have been pretty powerful for Moses, not just hearing that he's going to liberate them, but you're going to bring them to this very spot. But Moses, right? He's not ready. Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites, say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what's his name? What do I say to them? So he challenges God with this question, what's your name? And here's the interesting thing. God actually answers them. God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. There it is, and it's not translated. I like it not translated, by the way. He continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me to you. And again, assumably it's Ehyeh asher ehyeh again, but or maybe again, it's this name, Ehyeh, which is not a name. It's not a word in the sense that it's not a noun. It's I will be, or I am. And again, Ehyeh asher ehyeh is I'll often translated as I am what I am, or I will be what I will be. Definitely seems to have a connotation of the future. the word Ehyeh doesn't just mean I am, but it's oftentimes translated as that. Could be I am what I will be, or I will be what I am. But it's a wonderful phrase because the name of God that's given here in this first meeting is, my name is I am what I am, or I will be what I will be. That's what your name is. That's what you shall tell them my name is. That's who sent you. He has sent you. Now, of course, God's name, the ineffable name, the name we're not supposed to say, the Yud He Vav He name, is a version of this word Haya, Ehyeh, Hoveh. It means now, here. It's the root. It's the root for that same, kind of that same kind of idea of tense or presence or being. It's not really translatable. And that's what's so amazing about this answer that God gives him, because he doesn't really give him an answer that he can give to the people. He doesn't say, my name is the Lord, and you'll say the Lord sent you. That's not what he said. That's not what God said at that moment. God gives him an answer, which Moses, you could understand why maybe Moses has got a hard time dealing with this. Well, let's see what happens. God said further to Moses, thus shall you speak to the Israelites. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever. This is my appellation for all eternity. So here God says, Vayomer od Elohim, which is the word for God. That's why it says God. Adonai, Yud He Vav He. There's the name, Yud He Vav He, which is just translated as the Lord. So here, God kind of crystallizes the name Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Now, again, there's a possibility that one author wrote right here, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh sent you, and the other author wrote, Adonai, Yud He Vav He. Look, the way it's written together is that this name, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, is the Yud He Vav He name. That's how the name kind of crystallizes. But whatever the reason, however it came to be this way, what happens here is that Moses is given the name of God, and is the name, it's by saying that this God, your God, the God of your ancestors, is the God that's redeeming you. That's part of it, is that this God is now going to be known by this name forever. So there's a question here, which is, did Isaac and Jacob know God by this name? Did they know the name Yud He Vav He, but only did they know it? Now, again, at the time, there's just a family. It's only their kids. But now the Israelites are an entire people. And again, the word here is Bnei Israel, the Israelites. It's all of them. And it says that this is my name forever. This is my name. And as we read in the Midrash, and this is what was a huge chunk of the Midrash, that when God gave the name, the ineffable name, the name that's never supposed to be pronounced, because don't take God's name in vain. I mean, you can't even pronounce it. He also gave all secrets to the universe, because saying that name opened up and unlocked everything for Moses. So Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, Yud He Vav He, however you want to say this, in this moment, God shows Moses the secrets of the universe. And as we read in the Midrash, he literally takes Moses up to heaven and shows God knows the workings of the universe. And he takes him to paradise, where people go when they die. And he takes them to the netherworld, to hell, and shows them what hell's like for the people that don't do the right thing. And so this is an interesting moment, because the way the rabbis saw it, it wasn't just the name that he unlocked, it was the secrets to everything. And it's trying to get Moses to see what his responsibilities are. you're my emissary. You're my messenger. And this is what he says to him. God says, go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have taken note of you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have declared, I will take you out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. You tell the elders that this is what's going to happen. They will listen to you. Then you shall go to the elders of Israel, to the king of Egypt, with the elders, to the king of Egypt. And so it says the elders are also supposed to go. So you go with the elders to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. Now, therefore, let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God. So originally they're told, not Moses and the elders are supposed to go to Pharaoh and say, we're going to go for 3 days into the wilderness to make a sacrifice. Not that we're leaving Egypt, but we're going 3 days. Now, assuming that's where they're going, maybe to this same mountain, whatever. The point is that God knows that Pharaoh's not going to agree to that, right? Yet I know that the king of Egypt will let you go only because of a greater might. So I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with various wonders, which I will work upon them. After that, he shall let you go. Now, God's already told us, I'm not just taking you out 3 days. He already knows it. I'm bringing you to the land of flowing with milk and honey. So why are you telling Pharaoh you're going to go 3 days? Because he's not going to let you go anyways. So he tells him that right from the beginning. And I will dispose the Egyptians favorably towards this people, so that when you go, you will not go away empty-handed. So he also tells them by the time you leave, which again will be with various wonders, which I'm going to do, you're also going to go away not empty-handed. What does that mean? Each woman shall borrow from her neighbor and the lodger in her house objects of silver and gold, clothing, and you shall put these on your sons and daughters, stripping the Egyptians. Now, of course, it's strange that it says you shall borrow, because again, that's kind of the word that's used here. And of course, it's interesting. It says that the people that live in your house, like who are these people that are lodging in your house? It seems as though the Jewish people were running Airbnbs for the Egyptians. I don't know. It's very weird that they're leaving. But what's interesting about it is maybe there is something here to this, which is that when the Egyptians settled the Israelites in the land of Goshen, when that good Pharaoh did that with Joseph, that maybe the Israelites really owned that area that they had. And so when they're leaving Egypt, they're leaving property that essentially is theirs. And that the people that were living in their houses or in their properties, in their communities, were in fact not the owners of those properties. That the Israelites were the owners of those properties. And that when they leave, guess what? You're going to pay us for what we're going to leave behind. Which, as we know from Jewish history, including more modern history, happened over and over and over again. And so when people talk about whether the Palestinians should get money from Israel for property that's in Israel that was used to be owned by Arabs, the answer that a lot of people in Israel who lived in Iraq and Syria and Egypt and Morocco and every other Arab country said, you know what we left with from Yemen and every other Arab country? We left with nothing, because you took all of our property and made us leave. Basically gave us a choice of either dying in our home in Baghdad or Syria and Damascus, where Jews had lived for 2,000 years, and leave with nothing. And so they say, you know what? If you want reparations for Palestinian land taken, what about all of our money and all of our property that we left behind when we fled from Baghdad? In areas that we lived in for, in some cases, 2,000 years. So whether we borrowed it, whether we owed it, whether, again, these people who used to live in our houses are now going to be now not our houses anymore. Folks, when Saddam Hussein was in power in Iraq, he did this on purpose. He took formerly owned Jewish homes and gave them to Palestinians as a means of trying to say, look, those homes that were Jewish homes in Baghdad were mansions. And we've now put Palestinian families in those homes. So don't think that the things weren't connected, because they made them connected too. It's a fact. It's a fact. It's a historical fact that people are actually arguing over right now at this very moment. And so as we get into the last chapter that we're going to read today, or again, this is chapter 4. Again, a lot of stuff we covered, a lot of ground we covered. We now are still at the burning bush. So the chapter break here, kind of arbitrary, because again, the story's not over, because Moses isn't done. Moses spoke up and said, what if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say the Lord did not appear to you? So that's his next challenge. Maybe they're not going to listen to me. The Lord said to him, what's in your hand? And he applied a rod. He said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a snake. And Moses recoiled from it. Moses was scared. Then the Lord said to Moses, put your hand and grasp it by the tail. And he put out his hand, and he seized it, and it became blood in his hand. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, did appear to you. There you go. That's your miracle. That's a little miracle you got. Now, again, as we're going to see, it's not such a great miracle on the face of it, because the Egyptians can do the same thing. As a matter of fact, as we read in the Midrash just today, or just yesterday, sorry, the Pharaoh's own wife could do that. That's what actually the Midrash says. Pharaoh's wife does the same thing. When Moses throws down that miracle in next week's Torah portion, she did the same thing. That's the first trick up his sleeve. Well, the next one is literally up his sleeve. The Lord then said to him further, put your hand in your bosom. He put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, his hand was encrusted with snowy scales. He had that sorad, and it's not just, skin disease. It looks like snow. It's totally white. And he said, put your hand back into your bosom. And he put his hand back into his bosom, and we took it out. There it was again, like the rest of his body. So he has that second trick. We forget about that one because it's so weird. It's such a weird trick, because what you're doing is you're making your own body sick. It's kind of a tough plague, but it's one that, again, is miraculous. And so he said, God says, they don't believe or pay heed to the first sign. They'll believe the second. But wait, there's more. If they're not convinced by those two signs and still don't listen to you, take some of the water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. And that water you take from the Nile will turn to blood on the dry ground. Now, we know this is the first plague. But what's interesting about this plague is that when Moses gets it as his third of the three things that he's got, he can do this anytime he wants. According to this, Moses has this trick up his sleeve whenever he wants. Again, taking water from the Nile and turning it to blood. Now, as miraculous and as wonderful as these things are, most importantly, Moses isn't convinced. Because Moses says to the Lord, please, O Lord, I've never been a man of words, either in times past or now, that you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. I can't do this because I don't speak well. And again, we have this wonderful midrash that, again, he burned his tongue when he was an infant. He's been dealing with a speech impediment his whole life. Now, again, you may remember what God says to him here. But God's answer is, the Lord said to him, who gives man speech? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seen or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I'll be with you as you speak, and will instruct you what to say. And so God says to Moses, don't worry about it. I made everybody, I put power of speech into everybody. I know who you are. I know what you can do. But more importantly, don't worry about it because I'm going to tell you what to say. You're not even going to have to think about it. I'll be with you. And so Moses' challenge here is literally, I'm the wrong man for this. Now, God doesn't say, no, you're not. No, you're not. You speak fine. He doesn't say that to him. He says, I know what you can do, and you can do it. He doesn't say, you speak fine, you're good enough. He says, you are the person who's going to do this. And by the way, the takeaway from this is that maybe everybody knows Moses can't speak very well. Maybe everybody knows Moses is the last person that you'd ever expect being God's vessel. I mean, we even had a midrash when we read it, that Moses was not a handsome man. Moses was not a charismatic man. Moses was not a man who would normally be chosen to be the leader, to be the one. Now, again, it goes against our impression of Moses as Charlton Heston or Burt Lancaster, many of the people, or Val Kilmer even, who plays him in the movie, the voice of him in Prince of Egypt. I mean, these were good-looking leading men. But there's a myth that he is not a handsome man. We read it. And he's not somebody that people would look at and say, he's a good speaker, or he's charismatic. And God is basically saying here in this moment, that's part of what makes you so remarkable. That's what's going to blow everybody away. Because when you get up there and start speaking, people are going to know that I'm speaking, that it's me, that I'm speaking through you. That's how this is going to work. Moses doesn't get it. Moses does not want to go, period. But because here he says, but he said, please, oh Lord, make someone else your agent. Don't send me. Don't make me your agent. Don't make me your messenger. Please. He says, please. He says, please. But no, that's enough. At this point, God's had enough. Because it says the Lord became angry with Moses and he said, there is your brother, Aaron the Levite. He, I know, speaks readily. Even now he's setting out to meet you and he will be happy to see you. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with you and with him as you speak and tell both of you what to do. And he shall speak for you to the people. Thus he shall serve as your spokesman, with you playing the role of God to him. And so here God says to him, okay, Aaron is going to come with, and he's going to do the speaking. And what the rabbis point out here is that it says Aaron the Levite. Now we know, of course, that Moses is a Levite. Aaron becomes the high priest. And what the rabbi said was, in this moment, Moses, who was originally supposed to be the Kohen as well, the high priest, actually gave up his ability to be the Kohen because of his consistent and continuous refusal to take up the job that he's actually punished here. That Moses becomes the Levite and Aaron becomes the Kohen. That's one possibility that the rabbis gave us, that Aaron becomes the one who is the ancestor of the Kohanim. Remember, we don't know who Moses' descendants are. We don't know. We don't know what happens to his family, but we know what happens to Aaron's family because everybody who's a Kohen is a descendant of Aaron. Aaron's family are the ones that we know of. So there's a possibility, at least according to the rabbis, is that Moses, in his constant refusal, and again, God finally loses it with him. God gets angry with him, that's the punishment, that he gave up that ability. There's another midrash, by the way, too, that we read, and they're fresh in my mind, so that's why I'm sharing them all with you. The other possibility that the rabbis give is that this is actually where Moses gives up his ability to have the whole job of taking the people in. that at this moment Moses gave up his dream job, which is really, well, maybe it becomes his dream job, which is to finish the job, to take the people into the land of Israel. That Joshua will be designated as that person, because at this moment Moses in his refusal to step up and now have Aaron do it with him, isn't going to be the one who gets to finish the job. And this is the punishment. And we know it's because he takes the staff and strikes the rock. But look what happens into the next line. Take this rod, which you shall perform the signs. And the rabbis point out that there is the signal that the rod, the same one that he's going to strike the rock with, is his undoing. But that the undoing was actually done here in this moment. The staff, the same rod that's going to be the rod of his demise, is the rod here that he picks up after God finally says, enough. Okay, fine. I'll send Aaron too, and he'll be fine with it. But you just kind of gave up your ability. And so here it says right here, Moses went back to his father-in-law Yeter, which is again a version of Yitro, and said to him, let me go back to my kinsmen and see how they're faring. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. And so what's interesting here is that Moses actually asks permission from his father-in-law to do this. He didn't just run and go and do it. He could have said, hey, God told me to do it and I'm going. But he actually says, let me go back. And Yitro says, yes, go in peace. Lech l'shalom. Lech l'shalom. There's the words. And the Lord said to Moses and Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who sought to kill you are dead. Which is interesting because it seems like we're beyond that already. But again, possibility there's a different author that just popped up in there. But whatever. I mean, the point is that now's the time. Go back now. And Moses took his wife and his sons and mounted them on an ass and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God with him. So again, he takes his family, but of course he has to also take his mateh. He takes that rod. And it says, the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels that I put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. So there you have it right there. He's told, I will not let him send you away or right away. It's going to be hard. And then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. I have said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me. Yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. So what's weird about that is that we learn about the 10th plague before we learn of all the other plagues. Moses, and now we as the readers, already know what's going to have to happen, which means that Moses knows how this is going to turn out from the very beginning before he ever steps foot back in Egypt. Important, because it means that Moses understands right from the beginning where this story is going to, which isn't always conveyed in the movies. The movies don't like that idea. They like the idea of the drama of building up to it, where Moses is told by God at the right before the 10th plague, and now the 10th plague is going to happen. What is it? The death of the firstborn. Oh my God. Now, according to this, we know, Moses knows where this is going to go. And now, folks, we get to the weirdest 3 lines in the book of Exodus, and arguably 3 of the weirdest lines in the whole Bible. We've already spent time with this on Tuesday morning. And I only say that because we talked about it again yesterday in the Midrash. We don't know, and the rabbis didn't know in the Midrash. And we're going to read it, and we're going to be left with more questions and answers once again. At a night encampment on the way, the Lord encountered him and sought to kill him. So Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched his legs with it, saying, you are truly a bridegroom of blood to me. And when he let him alone, she added, a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. That is it. 3 lines. What happens in those 3 lines? As I mention every year, and as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, and again today or yesterday, it's a very bizarre scene. Who's God trying to kill? We assume it's Moses, because there's a scene with circumcision here where Moses' son isn't circumcised. He has 2 sons, but we only read about this son that wasn't circumcised. There's a midrash that we read that Moses has 2 sons. One is raised as a Midianite, one is raised as an Israelite, which is a weird story, which would explain why one of them wasn't circumcised. Doesn't really kind of explain how would Moses let that happen, but there's a midrash. That's what happened. Whatever happens, Sipporah is the one who intervenes here. And the rabbis point out that Sipporah is quick, like a bird, which is what her name is. Sipporah is a bird. And she goes quickly, circumcises the son, touches assumedly Moses' legs with it, and says, "You're a bridegroom of blood." Does it have something that had to do with Moses being a murderer of an Egyptian, that somehow something needs to be done in order to cleanse him and purify him? And we don't know. There's a lot of, again, questions, not a lot of good answers. We don't understand the full concept, but it says you're a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision, or through the circumcision. Chatan damim, again, a bridegroom of blood. Something happens here though, because again, according to the Torah, that's enough. The attack on Moses ends with that. Again, we don't really know. The Lord said to Aaron, "Go meet Moses in the wilderness." And he went, met him at the mountain of God, and he kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the things that the Lord had committed to him and all the signs about which he instructed him. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of Israel, right? All the Ziknei Bnei Israel, exactly as God said, "Go tell the elders of Israel what I'm doing." Aaron repeated all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and he performed all the signs in the sight of the people. Again, the elders get to see it. The people were convinced. When they heard that the Lord had taken note of the Israelites, that he had seen their plight, they bowed low in homage. Seems like things are going pretty good here. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go. They may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. I don't know your God." And again, according to the Midrash we just read, he looks through his books of gods and I don't see any God. I don't see any God in my books. There's no God that I know of. And they answered. And again, what's interesting about this is it doesn't say here that Moses and Aaron and the elders went. The they only now seems to be Moses and Aaron when it says they answered. And the rabbis like to point out in the Midrash that the elders were all full of bluster. But as Moses and Aaron were walking with the elders, all of a sudden they started peeling off. And before you know it, they get to Pharaoh and there's no one left. Where'd everybody go? The elders didn't have that much confidence or courage because they're not there. They're not there. So here's what happens. Again, they answered, "The God of Hebrews has manifested himself to us. Let us go, we pray, the distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord God, lest he strike us with pestilence and sword." So they're saying, we got to go, otherwise God's going to hurt us. That's what they said. Not you, not that he's going to hurt you, but he'll hurt us. But the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get to your labors." And Pharaoh continued, "The people of the land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease from their labors?" That same day, Pharaoh charged the taskmasters and the foremen of the people, saying, You shall no longer provide the people with straw for making bricks as there is heretofore. Let them go and gather the straw for themselves. Folks, this is where we got into the Midrash yesterday. This is where we're at. But impose on them the same quota of bricks as they've been making heretofore. Do not reduce it, for they're shirkers. That is why they cry, let us go and sacrifice to our God. So this work they're doing, now they're going to have to go make the straw. They're going to have to make the bricks. They're going to have to get everything together. They're going to do it themselves, every piece of it. You don't make it easy for them. Let heavier work be laid upon them, and let them keep at it and do not pay attention to their deceitful promises. So the taskmaster and the foreman of the people went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you any straw. You must go and get the straw yourselves wherever you find it, but there shall be no decrease in your work. And then the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. And the taskmasters pressed them, saying, you must complete the same work assignment each day as when you had the straw. And the foremen of the Israelites whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them were beaten. Why, they asked, did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks, either yesterday or today as you did before? So it says right here that the Pharaoh's taskmasters, the ones who were over the foremen, the Israelite foremen, so the Israelites had their own foremen who were kind of overseeing the work. And the Pharaoh's taskmasters are on them. And the foremen of the Israelites came to Pharaoh and said, why do you deal with us? Why are you doing this to us, to your servants? No straw is issued to your servants, yet they make this demand of us, make bricks. Thus your servants are being beaten when the fault is with your own people. He replied, you are shirkers. That is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Be off now to your work. No straw shall be issued to you, but you must produce your quota of bricks. Now the foremen of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order. You must not reduce your daily quantity of bricks. So they're getting beaten because they don't have the same amount of bricks, and the same quota of work is not, they can't do it. And so they left Pharaoh's presence, and they came upon Moses and Aaron standing in their path. And they said to them, may the Lord look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hands to slay us. And so these guys, these middlemen between Pharaoh, or between the taskmasters and the Israelites, they turn on Moses and Aaron. And Moses returned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with this people, and yet you still have not delivered your people. And again, look how far we're in chapter 6. This is where it ends. And the Lord said to Moses, you shall soon see what will be done, what I will do to Pharaoh. He shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive from his land. And that's the end. So it ends on a happy note. But as you see, we go all the way through 5 chapters, all the way into this first line of chapter 6. So it's an interesting break because we broke it here on this positive note. The Christian scholars have it start here, have it start with this line, and our first line of our next parsha is God spoke to Moses and said, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's the next meeting with where God is commanding them kind of on the next phase. But this ends in a really interesting place because, again, when we started this portion 2 hours ago, the Israelites had just become a people in the land of Egypt. And here we go all the way to this point where Moses has already done his first meeting with Pharaoh. The people have been punished. And again, where we are right now and where we're starting next week is at the darkest point of the suffering of the Israelites in Egypt. This is the darkest place. But we end with this message of hope. That you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. And again, at this point, the people are given, or at least Moses is given this idea that as dark as it seems to be, it's going to get better. And it's going to be something that you can't even imagine. I've told you, and remember, God's already told them what's going to happen, but you will see it with your own eyes. And essentially, I know, Moses, you don't even believe it yet. You don't believe how good it's going to get and how big it's going to be and how awesome it's going to be. But don't give up hope. And this is the message that we're left with right now, which I think is a really relevant message for us now. And again, people can talk about the political situation we're in right now, but look at it really from where we are right now, which right now in the darkest time of the year, we're literally just had the winter solstice. It's about as dark as it can be. It's light out for the least amount of time. And we have the highest rates of death right now from corona, and especially in Southern California right now. Our hospitals are overburdened and people are scared of what would happen if they have to go to the hospital for anything. And I will tell you that this message right here is right now where we're at right now, which is that it is going to be better, and it's going to be there will be a great end to your suffering. As bad as it's been, you're going to come out of this and you'll be okay. And who knows? I mean, again, it's hard for us to imagine that we're going to come out of this and we'll be in better shape than we were before. It's hard to believe, but who knows? Who knows what's happening right now and unfolding? But we can't give up. We can't give up. And again, we also have to do something. Just like our ancestors had to finally cry out. They had to take a step that hopefully in our darkest point, when we finally say enough is enough, or, we're going to do something about this, we are going to, again, see some great miracles. And I believe that, again, we're in a point right now where we're going to see some really, really amazing things happen. And I will tell you, as bad as this pandemic has been, if these vaccines and if this next part of our healing comes into fruition, folks, again, what we're trying to do right now with getting vaccines to millions of people, it's unheard of. And as we know, Israel's doing a much better job of it than we are. Unfortunately, again, it's not just scale, it's also willingness of the population to comply and to participate and to be effective partners in treatment. You have to do something yourself. But I will tell you, the message of this, folks, of this Torah portion, the way I understand it, is that perhaps what we're seeing unfold right now is effective cures for diseases and vaccines using hopefully this messenger RNA that's now part of this vaccine that we have right now, that using mRNA might be used to treat other diseases in the future, and that we may have finally turned a corner in delivering effective cures for disease. And that might be obscured right now because we're dealing with a tremendous health crisis. I don't want to say that's not a tremendous health crisis. I know it is. I just said it at the very beginning. This is a very real pandemic we're a part of. But what might come out of this is a whole new way of treating disease through a new level of genetics, which could really end up being a boon to all of humanity. And we did it fast and we did it quickly because we had to do it quickly. Because again, we only work when we have to. We only do these things when we finally cry out and say, we got to do something. That's what happens. But I'm telling you, what we may look back on at this watershed moment of dealing with this pandemic is a way to treat diseases as they pop up in a way that we could only imagine this 20 years ago. And I'm really hoping that what we can't see right now is a way of treating disease that will change what illness will look like for our descendants. Maybe it's our grandkids, maybe great grandkids, maybe still, again, we're not there quite yet, but we're seeing this is the first time we've done it. And I hope that that's where we're at right now, folks. We really can be at a moment of great miracles right now. So it's hard to see right now. I know it's hard to see, and I know it's difficult, and maybe we're botching the delivery of this. I mean, it's too early to tell. It doesn't maybe we could do better. I'm not here to judge that yet. It's too early. First of all, it's way too early to judge that. We've had the vaccines for 3 weeks. But let's understand that we may be witnessing an amazing rapid deployment of vaccination and of treatments for future diseases. So let's hope, and let again, everybody stay safe and keep everybody healthy, keep everybody in your prayers. And again, let's hope that our community stays healthy too. So thank you everybody for studying a little Torah today, and for us to bring a little light and a little warmth to the world. And thank you to the women in our group tonight. And thank you to the women throughout history who have saved our lives and who have saved the Jewish people. The women like Bithia and Miriam and Zipporah and Yocheved and Shifra and Pua. Again, especially tonight in beginning of January, let's thank our women who are our heroes and oftentimes unrecognized heroes. So thank you, and
Thank you for another great class.
our modern heroes, and you're one of them, Joyce. So thank you, and please stay healthy.
I'm
Stay
trying.
safe. I look forward to seeing you. I'm going to call you tomorrow. Okay.
Good. Oh, yeah. I
Okay.
would love it. Call me tomorrow.
All right, everybody. Please stay healthy.
You too,
Thanks,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Good to
Good
see you all.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night,
Good
all.
Night. Love you, Joyce.
Love you, Joy.
Love you all. Thank
All
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.